Shalom and welcome to a new podcast from Med Israel for Fred, that is With Israel for Peace in English. MIF was formed in the 1970s and has since grown to more than 11,000 members in Norway. And since 2018, we have expanded our work to Denmark, Iceland and Sweden, where we now boast more than 1,000 members combined. In the end of December last year, the General Assembly of the United Nations adopted a resolution asking the International Court of Justice the following question. What are the legal consequences arising from the ongoing violation by Israel of the right of the Palestinian people to self-determination? Joining me today to discuss this loaded question is Jonathan Turner, Chief Executive of UK Lawyers for Israel. Jonathan was admitted to the Bar of England and Wales in 1982, following degrees in law at Cambridge University and European law in Brussels. He has acted in a number of significant intellectual property cases in the UK, and his book Intellectual Property and EU Competition Law has been described as the leading work of reference on that interface. In 2011, Jonathan and few others started UK Lawyers for Israel as a voluntary association to counter BDS and other anti-Israel activity using the law. For us in MIF, it has been a joy to work together with Jonathan for several years already, and he is joining me now for the first time in a live broadcast. Welcome, Jonathan.
Well, thank you very much for having me on your program. Your organization is superb. And really an exemplar to other organizations around the world. And I'd like to thank your members and viewers for the excellent work that they do in supporting Israel in what is often a very difficult and hostile climate.
Wow, thank you. I didn't pay you to say that, did I?
No, you didn't.
No.
Not a cent. But I'll send you the invoice tomorrow.
That's really kind. And together we have been helped and inspired by UK Lawyers for Israel in several legal cases, also here in Norway. So thanks a lot. It's a joy to work together, and the purpose of our case is so worthy and valuable. But coming to the news this week, UK Lawyers for Israel, together with the European Leadership Network, ELNET, submitted a 40 pages memorandum, and I also saw there was 178 references in additional 21 pages, and to the International Court of Justice. And so briefly, what are you saying in the letter?
So we're pointing out particularly to the International Court of Justice that the questions are loaded. They make false assumptions in themselves. The General Assembly resolution contains a whole load of false allegations against Israel. And the court has been provided with over 29,000 pages of documents by the United Nations, which contain an absolute cartload of lies. One mendacious report and resolution follows another. They repeat and enlarged these warped allegations that either originate in prejudice or they were uttered in fear, whether terrorists standing over someone's in the background, or they were concocted by propagandists. And then they're compiled and enlarged and exaggerated by NGOs and UN bodies that are credulous or are downright anti-Semitic. And the result is you get this absolute mass of UN documents, UN resolutions, and so on.
Just to make that clear, Norway was right to abstain of voting for this resolution.
Well, it should have opposed the resolution.
Yeah.
That was not helpful. But it is true that this particular resolution, although the Palestinians can normally count on a clear majority of members of the United Nations voting for their resolutions, because they have the backing of the Organization of Islamic Cooperation, which has 57 members, and their developing country allies, which has whatever it is, 80 members. They constitute a clear majority of UN members, even without counting any other states. And they can normally vote through whatever they want. They can vote through, as I think Abba Iban remarked, that the earth is flat and it's Israel's fault that it's flat. But on this occasion, they didn't manage to muster a majority of UN members voting in favor of the resolution. A majority of members of the United Nations either voted against or abstained. In fact, less voted against than voted for, so the resolution was carried. But nevertheless, it was not wholeheartedly carried, even by this very anti-Israel institution. Yeah.
What will be the kind of the worst case scenario coming out from the International Court advising the General Assembly?
Well, the worst case outcome is an advice which, first of all, contains a whole load of false allegations against Israel, which will drive up anti-Semitism and anti-Israel views and activity. But over and above that, conclusions that say that any Israeli presence and any Israeli control, any Israeli presence in the West Bank and East Jerusalem, and any Israeli control of the borders of the West Bank and of Gaza is illegal. And so that would leave Israel with the choice of completely withdrawing from the West Bank and completely ending any control of the borders. And that would be a monumental disaster if Israel were to do that. It would be a security disaster. It would result in massive incursions and violence, and Israel would have to try and fight back, and then Israel would no doubt be criticized for having to kill people in fighting back. And so Israel will have that alternative, or of ignoring the decision of the International Court of Justice, and them being treated as a lawbreaker and an international pariah. I should say that the advisory opinion of the International Court of Justice, which is what is being sought by the United Nations General Assembly, is not legally binding. However, it will be, in practice, be treated as authoritative, and many states, organizations, companies, and people will treat it as being the law, and the facts being the facts as stated by the International Court. And this will all be completely wrong. So that's the worst case scenario.
So for me and other uninformed viewers, how is the court now dealing with this case? They are getting submissions. They have asked for submissions from countries and organizations, is it? And then they will make an opinion. And how many judges are actually involved in preparing an answer to the General Assembly?
So they have invited states to make submissions, and they've allowed intergovernmental organizations that asked to make submissions. They've allowed them to make submissions. and to participate in the proceedings. The organizations that asked and have been allowed are the Arab League, the Organization of the Islamic Conference, and the African Union. So you can guess which side they are on. And then several dozen UN member states have made submissions. There was a first round of submissions which were due by the 25th of July of this year. Those who did make those submissions are entitled to reply to the submissions by other parties by the 25th of October. Now, non-governmental organizations, including international non-governmental organizations, are not given a right to participate in the International Court of Justice's proceedings. I think the ICJ has misinterpreted its statute in that respect, but we can't do anything about it. But there is a procedure called Practice Direction 12, under which international non-governmental organizations can send submissions to the International Court. And these are then made available by the International Court in a room in its building, the Peace Palace in The Hague. The participants in the proceedings and others who can get access to the building can see them there. But of course, typically what NGOs that do this they actually publish these contributions to try and get them to a wider public, because quite frankly, the International Court of Justice is a rather traditional institution that's not very transparent, not really in the 21st century, to be perfectly frank, not adopting modern means of making its workings accessible to the public over the internet.
Yeah. But UK lawyers are in this century, as you can see. If you want to read the full submission that they sent this week, together with Elnet, it's available on their website. So please, after you finish listening to Jonathan and you are inspired, you can go to their website and look what they're doing, and also read the submission.
So what we hope is that member states will see the submission one way or another, and may take into account some of these points in their reply submissions, and in their the court normally organises an oral hearing and hears submissions from states that wish to participate, and we would hope that the points that we make might perhaps be addressed there, and we would very much encourage people to do what they can to press governments to take these points on board.
Yeah. So we have several viewers sending greetings to you. Arvid, a member of MIF, who is currently in Israel, says Happy Sukkot. And if any viewers have questions, please put them in the comments, either in English or Norwegian, and we'll try to get Jonathan to answer them. So we talked a little bit about the worst case scenario. What will be if the judges reads the submission of UK Lawyers for Israel and Elnet, and they are totally convinced? What will be the best outcome?
Well, what we have suggested that they say, our primary suggestion is that they should say we just can't answer these questions. We don't have sufficiently reliable information on which to base a valid judicial opinion. And what's more, the questions are not sufficiently clear to give an answer to. They ask what are the legal consequences of Israel's policies and practices, without specifying which policies and practices they are referring to. So it's very difficult for a judicial body or anyone else really to give a sensible answer to that kind of question, even if they did have reliable information, which they don't. So that's our primary, our first point. But if they really do feel the need to say something, to give some sort of opinion, what they should say is that in order to give effect to full Palestinian self-determination, I should say the Palestinians do have a significant measure of self-determination. There is a Palestinian regime in control of Gaza. And whilst it hasn't had elections since 2006, that's not Israel's fault. And in the West Bank, the Palestinian Authority rules over territory in which 90% of Palestinians in the West Bank live. So there is a significant measure of Palestinian self-rule, but nevertheless, it's not complete. But in order to give effect to Palestinian self-determination, the first thing that is required is to establish what Palestinians actually want. The whole concept of self-determination is that you allow a people to decide how they wish to be governed. And in fact, a poll at the end of 2021 of Arabs in Jerusalem found that 93% of Arabs in East Jerusalem prefer a continuation of Israeli rule over a united city, because quite frankly, dividing Jerusalem along the old armistice line of 1949, which was the ceasefire line in the struggle in which neither side prevailed in that area. If you were to divide the city again, it would be an absolute disaster for the population of Jerusalem on all sides. It would be a security disaster, and it would be an economic disaster, and it would be a social disaster, and access to facilities on each side would become very difficult or impossible and dangerous, and so on. So it's not surprising that the Arabs in East Jerusalem would not be very happy with what some people want to thrust down their throats. So the first thing that needs to be done is to find out what Palestinians actually want. And then the next thing is that to give effect to Palestinian self-determination whilst securing and acknowledging and accommodating the rights of Israel and the Jewish people, and indeed also the interest of the world in the area. You can't just suddenly separate territory down an artificial line and say, well, that's that. There has to be, and the Oslo Accords recognized this, and the central object of the Oslo Accords was that there should be a political process, a process of negotiation to address difficult, outstanding issues, which include Jerusalem, include borders, include security, include refugees, include Israeli communities in the West Bank. All these raise quite difficult or very difficult political issues, which can only be resolved by working together and trying to agree them. And I know it's taken time, but progress has gradually been made since 1967. There have been peace treaties with Egypt and Jordan, and progress with the peace treaties and normalization agreements with the Emirates and Bahrain, and now and indeed with Sudan and Morocco, and now discussions with Saudi Arabia, which include consideration of and progress on Palestinian-Israel relations. So all this is going on. Progress is gradually being made, and this is the only solution. So what we've said is that the court should answer these questions by saying that the to achieve Palestinian self-determination, the parties must continue the Oslo process in seeking to negotiate a solution to the final status issues that were specified in the Oslo agreements.
Yeah.
It's not correct to say that Israel is denying Palestinians the rights to self-determination.
Absolutely. I used to say that now, after so many years of Israeli control, the Palestinians are closer to self-determination than ever before, and they have. I was reading this new book by a really anti-Israel journalist now these last few weeks, and I published a review both on the website and on YouTube yesterday. But he has an interesting sentence that I want to share with you. He's saying regarding Yasser Arafat was so eager to move from Tunisia to the new areas under PA rule in the mid 1990s. He's saying then his plan was to make so much trouble for Yitzhak Rabin that the Israeli Prime Minister would cave in. So in fact, this pro-PLO journalist, he admits in one sentence, he gives away the whole strategy of Yasser Arafat after he got access to the Gaza Strip.
Yes, and of course that has been a Palestinian strategy since the 1930s, since Hajj Amir al-Husseini. They found that the British caved in to Palestinian violence, and they now, and to some extent they may be right, that certainly the international community caved into Palestinian violence, and that they hope that Israel will as well.
We have got a couple of questions from the viewers, and if there are more questions, please go ahead and type them in the comments. And I have more questions regarding the submission to the International Court of Justice. So Kjersti from Trondheim in Norway is asking, do you have any opinion on countries that have and haven't accepted Palestine as a state? Is it right to accept Palestine as a state?
Well, no, I don't think it is right to accept Palestine as a state. On two basic reasons. One is they don't really qualify as a state according to the normal criteria laid down in the Montevideo Convention for the existence of a state. And secondly, on a practical level, because of the existing situation in international institutions, including the International Court of Justice, recognition of Palestine as a state creates additional barriers to a satisfactory resolution of the situation, and it is actually ultimately recognizing it at this stage without those problems being resolved will ultimately prolong the problems and make them more difficult to resolve, and that is actually to the disadvantage of Palestinians as well as Israelis and Jewish communities as well around the world.
Yeah. So Rika Greenberg, MIF's leader in Denmark, she asked, why does the international community still not demand that the PA comply with the Oslo Accords as a condition for PA funding?
Well, I think they should, but there is a dilemma for Israel and the international community, which is that if the Palestinian Authority collapses, a worse regime could take over. In particular, Hamas might take over the West Bank, and that would turn the West Bank into an enlarged Gaza. With constant repetitive attacks on Israel, and with Israel being forced to respond by even by tighter controls, by less access for Palestinians to jobs in Israel and in Israeli communities in Judea and Samaria and Jerusalem. And more military action would then have to take place with its own consequences. You have all the problems about having to restrict supplies, for example, of concrete, how to ensure that it is used to build homes and commercial buildings and not to build tunnels. You have all those problems would be instead of only in Gaza, which is not so big a problem to have have some degree of defensive measures against Gaza, to have those defensive measures against the West Bank, where towns are literally major Israeli towns, including, of course, Jerusalem, are just yards away, just meters away, is a terrifying prospect. So it is actually very, very difficult to work out how to deal with this. And it's kind of protection racket. If you don't pay us, those other people will get in and will destroy you.
A third question from a viewer. The system doesn't give the name, sorry about that, but he or she asked, can you say something about the San Remo conference? And you also mentioned it in your submission.
Yes. So as well as, although the United Nations have provided over 29,000 pages of documents to the International Court of Justice, they are all documents published after 1967. The ostensible rationale is, well, it's about the occupation, in inverted commas, as we will put it, and that only started in 1967. But by missing out the whole of 4,000 years of Jewish, the connection of the Jewish people with the Holy Land, and more recent history stemming from, for example, the mid-19th century, when the Jewish population of Jerusalem became a majority of that city. So it's been a majority Jewish city for now nearly 2 centuries. And it omits the key international developments and agreements and documents that established the right of the Jewish people to reconstitute their national home and to have a renewed state in Palestine. And those included the San Remo conference, where the resolutions of the key members of the Council of the League of Nations, which was, of course, the forerunner of the United Nations, they decided to give effect to the Balfour Declaration of the British government, which had by then been adopted or approved by a large number of countries around the world. They decided that they would give effect to that by giving Britain the mandate for Palestine to enable the Jewish national home to be re-established there in accordance with the Balfour Declaration. At the same time, they also made arrangements to establish Arab states in about 97% of the territory that had been liberated from the Turkish Empire as a result of its defeat, along with Germany and Austro-Hungary, in the First World War. So it had these arrangements, which I think, looking overall, they were fair, and they were regarded as fair at the time, in which the Arab territory liberated from the Turkish Empire, and 97% of the total territory was allocated for the creation of Arab states, and 3% was allocated for the reconstitution of the Jewish national home. Chaim Weizmann, the Zionist leader, noted that at the time, anyone going into the restaurant at the hotel where the delegations were staying found the Arab and Jewish delegations sitting together at a really festive meal, congratulating themselves on their achievements at San Remo. So it really was regarded as good for Arabs and good for Jews. Prince Faisal was also on record as saying that they want the Zionists to come to Palestine to help develop Palestine for the benefit of the Arabs and help develop the Arab world. And this vision actually is, I think, what is animating the recent Abraham Accords and the developments in Saudi Arabia. The actual opportunities for cooperation between Israel and countries are very substantial. They have a common enemy, of course, in Iran, but also the opportunities for economic development and so on. All this was sort of there at San Remo, and I think needs to be remembered and is ignored, unfortunately, in the information that's been provided to the International Court of Justice, except by us.
You note in your submission that obtaining reliable information relating to Israel presents particular problems. Could you expand on that, please?
Well, this is a real difficulty because there is so much misinformation about Israel. And I think there are a number of causes of this. First of all, anti-Semitism has been very deeply entrenched around the world by centuries of persecution of the Jewish people. I appreciate that many people do see otherwise. Christians, Muslims, others as well, and indeed, anti-Semitism was never quite as deeply entrenched in India and China, for example, as it has been in some other countries. But this anti-Semitism is very deeply entrenched and results in, even amongst people who think that they are not racist and fair-minded and so on, that there tends to be an assumption if something bad happens that the Jews are to blame. You see it in all these conspiracy theories about the Jews controlling the banks or whatever and being responsible for banking crashes. You see it on a much more extreme scale in blaming Israel for the attacks of 9/11, those kind of conspiracy theories. But conspiracy theories apparently given credibility by people like Professor Falk, whose report was relied upon by the International Court of Justice in the case about the security barrier. So you have people who assume that things bad that happen are the fault of the Jews, and credulously believe people who criticisms that are made of the Jews and the Israel's the Jewish state. Much of the prejudice that's been entrenched against Jews is now entrenched against Israel as the Jewish state. So that's a major factor, and this leads to a lot of the reporting. The next factor is the existence of this large majority hostile to Israel in the United Nations, which I mentioned earlier. Now they gang up together, or they work together as a coalition because they have all sorts of other interests to promote. Historically, the world was dominated by the Western powers, and it's only natural for the non-Western powers to want to redress that and to work together. But where you have a large segment of that also having a particular hostility towards Israel and supporting their own who has a quarrel with Israel, you have this effect of this automatic majority being deployed to be anti-Israel. So they pass lots of hostile resolutions. They create lots of commissions and bodies. They appoint people to these bodies who are hostile to Israel. And this greatly expands and causes lots of information to be disseminated. And if you're a journalist and you get a big report of the United Nations saying Israel is guilty of sin, what are you going to write about?
So in your submission, you quote or you state that the UN General Assembly has adopted 140 resolutions condemning Israel since 2015. And only 64 resolutions condemning all other countries in the rest of the world combined. And the UN Human Rights Council has adopted 104 resolutions condemning Israel and 97 condemning all other countries combined. So it's really it's so true what you're saying, that they are ganging up on Israel because it's serving their own interest. And the amazing thing is that so many people in Norway, in Europe in general, they believe that, oh, if it's from the UN, then it's something moral and good and unbiased. And in the resolution from the General Assembly that you are commenting, they are writing measures by Israel aimed at altering the demographic composition, character, and status of the holy city of Jerusalem. And there you gave some really important statistics to counter that claim.
Yes, so the Arab population of Jerusalem has increased from 26% in 1967, when the whole city came under Israeli control, to 39%. So
that must be ethnic cleansing, I would say.
Yes.
If a population increases from 26% to 39%, and the absolute numbers is like in hundreds of thousands increase, that has to be ethnic cleansing.
That's right. It's increased by 450%, the Arab population of Jerusalem. The Jewish population has also increased, but not as fast. But overall, the city has flourished under Israeli rule to the benefit of both ethnic communities. Now, not everything is perfect. Not always are the roads mended, and sometimes the rubbish is not collected. People always have their gripes, but generally speaking, it is a successful city under Israeli rule, and people want to live there, and certainly the Arab population has increased massively. So the Israelis must be incredibly incompetent if they were attempting to alter the demographic composition against Arabs in Jerusalem.
Yeah. Several new questions, so the viewers think that you give good answers. That's why they keep on sending new questions. So many journalists and pro-Palestinian groups claim that the San Remo Treaty and the Foundation for International Law that was made there is not anymore valid after the UN was established. What do you think about that? Or how can you argue against it?
Correct. Yes. I should say that San Remo was not a treaty. It was an agreement at an international conference between the leading members of the Council of the League of Nations. The real legal instrument is the mandate of the League of Nations, which confirmed which charged Britain with re-establishing the Jewish national home in Palestine, and specified the borders within which that was to be established. And those borders were actually the Jordan River, Arava Valley line and the Mediterranean Sea. It's fair to say that the border between the British Mandate of Palestine and the French Mandate of Syria was established by a later treaty between Britain and France that was approved by the League of Nations. But anyway, those borders were established then. Then the UN Charter contains an important provision, Article 80, which specifies that in relation to the League of Nations mandate territories, existing rights and obligations should continue unless and until the League of Nations mandate is replaced by a UN trusteeship, which was essentially the same thing, but brought under the UN system rather than the League of Nations system. So that was never done. People couldn't agree on that, and that was partly because the Arabs launched a war to try and destroy any Jewish state. That wasn't done, and the position remains that those rights and obligations in the League of Nations mandate continue, and in fact, in relation to other territories around the world, notably Southwest Africa and Namibia, the International Court has specifically said that Article 80 continues the rights and obligations that existed under League of Nations mandates. Those rights and obligations remain in force, even if the mandatory has resigned, has left the territory. The rights and obligations continue to exist, and in case of the obligations, they bind the administration, whoever it is, of the territory. So everywhere else in the world, this principle is applied, that the rights recognised by the League of Nations mandate continue unless and until they are fulfilled by the independence of the people for whose benefit they were created. You
touch now on another question, because there is a viewer, Arvid, says that some Arabs say that Prince Faisal was Jewish. His paternal grandmother was, and he shouldn't be listened to because of he had a grandmother who was Jewish. And actually, he heard this recently from a politician in the Labour Party in Norway just recently. And Haymin al-Husseini was always in opposition to Faisal's wish to normalize relations with the Jewish community in Palestine. And he's asking then, is not the San Remo framework stronger than the UN proposal to divide the land?
Well, as I say, I think when you say the San Remo framework, I think the mandates that were set up pursuant to the agreement that was reached at San Remo, effectively the League of Nations as an institution approving the arrangements that were agreed in principle at San Remo. That I think remains in force, except where the peoples concerned have established their independence. So in the case of Iraq, for example, the mandate was replaced by an independent Iraqi state. And likewise, Syria and Lebanon emerged out of the French mandate for Syria, and they are now independent states. And in the territory west of the Jordan, well, in the territory within the armistice lines, that were established in 1949, the Jewish people were able to establish a state and secure their independence. And that is now the independent state of Israel. But matters were not resolved in the remaining territory of Judea, Samaria, East Jerusalem, and Gaza. And there, in my view, the rights established by the League of Nations mandate remain in force, which and those do include the right of Jews to settle in those areas. I mean, in practice, Israel has really abandoned any claim in relation to the Gaza Strip, but the claim is maintained in relation to the West Bank, and is one of the issues to be resolved by negotiation in accordance with the Oslo Accords. But it also, and the League of Nations mandate, it's important to mention this, also provides that the civil and religious rights of all peoples must be respected. And again, Israel does its very best to ensure that. The Temple Mount in Jerusalem is a tiny area in overall terms. But I quote the figure in our submission: 1 million Muslims visited the Temple Mount last year, which is a very large number indeed, and more than I think ever in history. Muslims pray on the Temple Mount these days.
Yeah. That was a really good and dense history lesson. The final question from the viewers is asking you to look into the future. How do you think the PA, and we can add Hamas, will react if normalization with Saudi Arabia materializes?
Well, we don't know what form this is going to take, and to what extent Palestinian authorities' aspirations will be adopted in it. The Palestinian Authority tried to ignore and undermine the Abraham agreements with the Emirates and Bahrain, but they found that wasn't working, and it was not a helpful strategy for them. So they are now seeking to work with Israel and Saudi Arabia and the United States, and try and reach an agreement which progresses their aims, as well as the aims of Israel and Saudi Arabia and the United States. I think that they will get something. I don't know exactly what it will be, and I think they will reckon that their better strategy is to go along with it. I think it's complicated because I do actually think that the reference to the International Court is one of the reasons why there has been an upsurge in violence this year. I think there are efforts being made to try and say, the situation is totally unstable. You absolutely must intervene, International Court, because nothing else is working, which is not the truth. The standard of living in Palestinian in the West Bank and even in the Gaza Strip is continuing to rise, in fact. Progress is being made in these international discussions, slowly in the overall scheme of things, but gradually it is being made. I think it's unfortunate that these questions have been referred to the International Court. I think it actually does give an excuse or desire to promote hostility in the attempt to try and leverage and unsound result.
Yeah.
And I think that's all actually ultimately counterproductive.
Yeah. Just to emphasize what you're saying, that the living standard and economy of the Palestinians are developing. I saw now in 2021, the average human development index globally was 0.722, and most of the Palestinian regions have higher than the global average in human development index rating.
Yes, I'm sure that, yes, and many countries in the world are much poorer
Yeah.
than the West Bank and the Gaza Strip. And I should say that, like most areas around the world, the economy of the Palestinian of the West Bank and the Gaza Strip took a hit with COVID, but it has now bounced back and is now, according to World Bank figures, it's now higher per capita than it was pre-COVID. The overall graph of the last 20 years has been one of going up nearly all the time.
Yeah. And in spite of that, there are Norwegian researchers saying that the situation for the Palestinians are getting worse year by year.
Well, it's just not true.
No, sure. So there is a need for UK Lawyers for Israel and MIF in the future.
We are dealing with a freedom of information request in the UK tribunal that deals with freedom of information requests, and the UK Foreign Office has cited a whole load of allegations from the Norwegian Refugee Council saying that the situation is dire and terrible and getting worse and so on. And we've countered with a whole load of figures from the World Bank showing that the opposite is the case.
Yeah. Jonathan, this was really good. Thanks a lot for joining.
My pleasure. Thank you very much, and congratulations.
All the best in everything you do in UK Lawyers for Israel, and especially with this submission. Is there a way that you think our viewers can promote your case?
Well, I think promote it by writing to politicians in different countries, Norway, Sweden, Denmark, obviously, where you operate, but you may have viewers in other countries as well. Write to your political representatives, expressing your concern that the International Court of Justice is being misinformed and manipulated, and asking them to try and ensure that truth is represented. And they can. Our submission is available on our website, and Conrad, I don't know whether you put it in the chat link or whatever, but it can be downloaded there and sent to people, to politicians and officials, to explain what the situation really is.
Yep. I put now the link to the article or the blog post on your website, so that everybody can access it. I put it in the comments. And Kjersti says, on behalf of all the viewers, thank you for your clear history and international law lesson.
Well, thank you.
Okay. Have a good day.